On the night of March 14, 2019, a trail camera mounted on a fence post along Route 219 in Pocahontas County, West Virginia, photographed a mountain lion. Not a blurry smear, not a shadow, a clear, side-profile image, time-stamped, geotagged, and later submitted to wildlife biologists who spent 3 weeks trying to explain it away. The animal weighed an estimated 180 pounds. That number should stop you. The average male mountain lion in the western United States, the subspecies everyone agrees still exists, tops out around 137 pounds. The eastern subspecies, the one that used to prowl these same ridges, was officially declared extinct in 2011. So what you are looking at, if the image is real, is an animal 30% heavier than the western cats, standing on a road in a state where its kind have not been counted in over a century. It should not have been there. And the weight, I will come back to why that number matters more than any other thing in this story. Here is the number that makes the weight worse. The nearest confirmed western mountain lion breeding population, a colony biologists can actually point to, census, and stake their careers on, sits in the Black Hills of South Dakota. That is roughly 1,500 miles from Pocahontas County. 1,500 miles of cornfields, interstate highways, river crossings, and suburban sprawl. For context, the longest dispersal ever recorded for a western mountain lion was a young male who walked 1,500 miles from South Dakota to Connecticut between 2009 and 2011 before being struck and killed by a car outside Greenwich. That animal made headlines precisely because nothing like it had been documented before. It was considered a once-in-a-generation event, and it weighed 140 pounds when it died, not 180. So even the most extraordinary dispersal in the scientific record does not explain the animal on that fence post camera. A wandering western cat, arriving exhausted after the longest solo journey of any lion ever tracked, would still be 40 pounds lighter than what the image in West Virginia shows. The distance and the weight do not fit the same story. They cannot both be true of a western disperser, which leaves you with a harder question. If it did not walk here from the Black Hills, if it is not a lost westerner burning through muscle mass across the plains, then what is it? Where did it start? And why is it so large? The Pocahontas County image is not the only one. That is the thing. Start in Giles County, Virginia, September 2013. A deer hunter running a Moultrie camera along a ridgeline above the New River captured a full-body shot of a large cat moving parallel to a game trail. The Virginia Department of Game and Inland Fisheries logged the image, estimated the animal at 160 to 175 pounds based on comparison with surrounding vegetation, and closed the file without a formal determination. No comment was issued. The file sat. Then Harlan County, Kentucky, June 2016. 2 separate trail cameras, owned by different landowners set a quarter-mile apart on the same ridgeline, photographed what appears to be the same animal on the same night, moving northeast. The timestamps put it covering that quarter mile in 11 minutes. Biologists who reviewed the images noted the shoulder height, higher than the top of a standard 32-inch fence post in the frame. A western mountain lion, full-grown male, stands roughly 28 inches at the shoulder. This animal was taller. Then Greenbrier County, West Virginia, 2018, 1 year before the Route 219 image. A livestock owner reported a calf kill with bite spacing and drag pattern consistent with a large felid. Wound impressions measured wider than any documented western cougar bite on file with the state. Virginia, West Virginia, Kentucky. A decade. 4 documented anomalies within 200 miles of each other, all running heavier and taller than any western cat on record. The single sighting is not singular, which opens a question the available taxonomy does not comfortably answer. Is this a remnant population that never fully vanished, a recolonization from a stock no one is tracking, or something the field guides have not yet been asked to name? To answer that question, you have to go back. Not decades, centuries. Because the animal that should not be in Pocahontas County was, for most of recorded North American history, exactly where it belonged. The Appalachian Mountains were its core range. Not a fringe, not a corridor. The core. Dense hardwood forest, high ridge country, unlimited deer. The eastern mountain lion, Puma concolor cougar, owned this landscape the way the landscape owned its own rock. And the people who lived here knew it, because they named things after it. Painter Creek in Pendleton County, West Virginia. Catamount Hollow in Sullivan County, Tennessee. Puma Ridge, straddling the Virginia-Kentucky line. Those names did not come from myth. They came from encounters frequent enough that the animal needed a word and then a name on a map. Catamount, painter, panther, all the same animal, called by different names in different hollows, persistent enough in daily life that it got written into the geography. Then the killing started in earnest. Bounty programs, land clearing, the systematic collapse of the white-tailed deer population that the cats depended on. By the late 1800s, the sightings were thinning. By the early 1900s, they had nearly stopped. The last confirmed eastern mountain lion kill in the Appalachian Core, 1920, Hanover County, Virginia. A single adult male, shot by a farmer protecting livestock. 91 years later, in 2011, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service made it official. The eastern subspecies was declared extinct, gone from the books. And yet, Painter Creek still runs through Pendleton County. The name outlasted the animal by more than 100 years, which raises the question the maps themselves keep asking. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service did not declare the eastern mountain lion extinct carelessly. The 2011 review was methodical. It ran 5 years. It examined more than 100 years of submitted sightings, photographs, track casts, and physical evidence across 18 eastern states. The biologists involved were not dismissing the question. They were answering it, carefully, using the best available science. And their answer was clean, internally consistent, reasonable. Here is how it works. The eastern subspecies is gone. Therefore, any cougar confirmed east of the Mississippi is, by definition, either a dispersing western animal or an escaped captive. Therefore, no sighting, however detailed, can count as evidence of the eastern subspecies. Therefore, the eastern subspecies remains gone. That is not a conspiracy. That is how extinction classifications function under the Endangered Species Act. Once a subspecies clears the bar for delisting, the evidentiary standard inverts. The burden shifts entirely to the evidence. The framework was codified in a 106-page peer-reviewed document published in August 2011, USFWS Technical Report, R95BP002. Page 43 is where it gets uncomfortable. It specifies that photographic evidence alone, without physical confirmation, is insufficient for taxonomic reassessment. Physical confirmation means a body, a tissue sample, or a live animal in federal custody. That standard is not unreasonable. Science needs more than photographs. But consider what it means in practice. The 4 anomalies in Virginia, Kentucky, and West Virginia, the oversized trail camera images, the bite spacing on the Greenbrier calf, they arrive inside a framework that was built in advance to classify them as something else. What happens to evidence that enters a system designed to relabel it before it can be counted? The answer to that is not a question about mountain lions. It is a question about what we have decided counts as proof. So what does the evidence actually look like when it arrives? Let's be specific. In October 2011, a mountain lion was struck and killed by a car on the Wilbur Cross Parkway in Milford, Connecticut. The animal was male, healthy, and weighed 140 pounds. The Connecticut Department of Energy and Environmental Protection recovered the carcass, extracted tissue, and submitted it for DNA analysis. The results came back unambiguous. The animal was genetically linked to a population in the Black Hills of South Dakota. Same animal, same dispersal story, same 1,500 miles. The one individual the scientific community had already called extraordinary. The response was predictable and, inside the framework, correct. The Connecticut cougar proved that western dispersers could reach the east. Therefore, it confirmed, not challenged, the conclusion that eastern animals no longer exist. A 1,500-mile journey with no documentation, no tracking data, no recorded waypoints through a dozen states, and the system absorbed it as evidence that everything was already accounted for. But hold that thought. If a 140-pound male can walk from South Dakota to Connecticut and no agency tracks a single mile of it until he dies on a parkway, what else is moving through the same corridor right now, unrecorded, alive? The Harlan County images from 2016 were submitted to the Kentucky Department of Fish and Wildlife Resources. The official determination: probable escaped captive, evidence insufficient, no follow-up trapping, no hair snare deployment. The file closed in 11 days. 11 days. 3 categories of evidence: DNA, reclassified as Western origin; roadkill specimens, absorbed as confirmation of the existing model; trail cameras, dismissed as inconclusive without physical confirmation; Each one enters the framework and comes out labeled as something it cannot be. The evidence exists. The framework determines what it is allowed to mean. But here is where I have to be careful, because this story has a popular version, and the popular version is inflated. There are Facebook groups in Mingo County, West Virginia, and Letcher County, Kentucky, where people post cougar sightings the way other people post sunsets. Weights in those posts routinely hit 220, 250, even 300 pounds. One circulating image from 2020, traced back to a trail camera near Pineville, West Virginia, was identified within 48 hours as a photograph taken in British Columbia in 2017. Same image, different continent, shared thousands of times as proof. That kind of inflation does damage. It muddies the actual record. It gives the framework something easy to dismiss, and the framework takes the gift every time. So strip it all out. Remove every unverified weight estimate. Remove every photograph that cannot be geotagged and cross-referenced. Remove the folklore. Remove the campfire numbers. What remains is narrower, and it is still strange. The documented anomalies, the ones that survive peer review, the ones with comparison objects in the frame, the bite spacing measurements on file with state agencies, describe animals running 15 to 20% heavier than the published Western cougar average. Not 300 pounds, not legend. 15 to 20%, consistently, across independent cases in 3 states over a decade. Nobody has a clean explanation for that. The inflated version was always a distraction. The real mystery is what is left after you take it away. 3 explanations, none of them comfortable, none of them mutually exclusive. The first, remnant population. A small breeding group that persisted in the most remote terrain the Appalachians have. The roadless highlands of McDowell County, the Dolly Sods Wilderness in Tucker County, the back hollows of the Clinch Mountain Corridor in Scott County, Virginia. Surviving at densities too low to produce regular road mortality, too wary to trigger systematic camera traps. Remnant populations are not unprecedented. The Florida panther was functionally extinct on paper before biologists found a breeding population in Hendry County in 1973. 23 animals, invisible until they weren't. The second, Western recolonization, but with a size filter. A dispersing male from the Black Hills is not a random animal. He is almost by definition the largest and most aggressive male in his cohort, the one driven out by competition. If the ones surviving the journey east are outliers on the large end of the Western distribution, the animals arriving here were never representative of the average. They were the exceptions. And eastern white-tailed deer run heavier than western mule deer. An animal that arrives large and eats well, in a landscape with no competing apex predators, faces zero downward pressure on size. Over a generation, the average drifts upward. The third gets the least attention, possibly because it is the most embarrassing: captive cougars. By the last USDA count from 2019, an estimated 5,000 to 10,000 large exotic felids are held privately in the United States, more than exist in the wild across all of North America. Captive breeding programs routinely select for size because larger animals command higher prices. A captive lineage bred for size over 4 or 5 generations and then released, or escaped, or dumped when the owner could no longer feed it, enters the landscape as something the wild population never produced. A single large founder pair, establishing in terrain where nothing competes with them, could produce exactly the pattern the trail cameras are showing. Animals heavier than the Western average, geographically clustered, appearing across a decade in a 200-mile radius. Probably all 3 are true. Not 1, not 2, all 3, operating at different scales in the same mountains at the same time. The size anomaly has a mechanism. Each explanation accounts for part of the weight, but none of them alone is sufficient. The animal is real. What it is precisely may be a question the existing categories were not built to answer. And that is the real problem. Not the weight, not the taxonomy, the categories. The word confirmed, used in wildlife management reports the way a doctor uses negative as a neutral technical verdict, is not neutral. It was never neutral. It is a gatekeeping mechanism, and the gate was calibrated before the first piece of evidence walked in front of the first trail camera. Confirmed, in the framework codified by the 2011 USFWS review, means physical specimen in federal custody. It does not mean observed. It does not mean documented. It means the institution has touched the body. Everything else is by definition, unconfirmed, regardless of image resolution, bite measurements, or a livestock kill in Greenbrier County with wound spacing that matches no Western cat on any agency's file. The standard was not designed maliciously, but it was designed by the same body whose operational budget contracts when a species is active and expands when a species is gone. That is not an accusation. It is a description of incentive structure, which puts you in an uncomfortable position as an outside observer. If the institution that decides what is real has a structural interest in one answer, what does legitimate scientific uncertainty look like from where you are standing? How do you distinguish honest methodology from a framework running in its own favor? You cannot always. That is the honest answer. And that is not a mountain lion problem. That is a problem about how societies decide what exists and who pays the cost, in this case measured in livestock, in habitat planning, in hunting regulations across 14 eastern states, when the institution guesses wrong. The animal on Route 219 was never just an animal. It was a question the existing system was not built to answer honestly. That was always what this was about. So here is what this was never about. It was never about fear. A 180-pound animal moving through Pocahontas County at night is not a threat to you in any meaningful statistical sense. Mountain lions kill fewer people per decade in all of North America than domestic dogs kill per year in a single state. The fear is a distraction. It always was. The harder question is the one the fear keeps you from asking. What did we do to this landscape that made it empty enough, quiet enough, that something is now trying to fill it again? The eastern forest lost its apex predator the same way it lost the chestnut tree and the passenger pigeon. Systematically, deliberately, without a plan for what the absence would cost. The deer population has grown unchecked across 14 eastern states for 100 years. Lyme disease, carried by the ticks those deer host, now infects 500,000 Americans annually. That number did not exist before the predator did. Stand at the tree line past any parking lot in Greenbrier County at dusk and look into the dark. Something may be there. That is not the frightening part. The frightening part is what it took. A century of absence, a landscape bent out of shape, for it to come back at all.